We had a productive meeting yesterday, and with all four leaders in the Congress. It was civil and respectful, and everyone came to the meeting, I think, in good faith. I'm confident that we'll get the agreement on the budget, that America will not default. And every leader in the room understands the consequences if we fail to pay our bills. And it would be catastrophic for the American economy and the American people if we didn't pay our bills. And to be clear, this negotiation is about the outlines of what the budget will look like, not about whether or not we're going to, in fact, pay our debts. The leaders have all agreed we will not default. Every leader has said that.
Mr. President, what about work requirements specifically are you still considering? It sounds like it's still on the table and you haven't ruled it out. Which would you be willing to accept?
Well, I'm not going to accept any work requirements that's going to impact on medical health needs of people. I'm not going to accept any work requirements that go much beyond what is already. Well, I voted years ago for the work requirements that exist, but it's possible there could be a few others, but not anything of any consequence.
The U.S. Supreme Court let stand, for now, an Illinois state ban on assault-style rifles and large-capacity magazines, enacted after a deadly mass shooting in Chicago's Highland Park suburb last summer. A gun rights group and a gun dealer suing to overturn the assault weapons ban appealed to the 9 justices and asked for an injunction preventing the measure from taking effect while their case is heard by the courts. But the top court on Wednesday denied that request. Earlier this year, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed into law the Protect Illinois Communities Act, banning the sale and distribution of many kinds of high-powered, semi-automatic assault weapons, including AK-47 and AR-15 rifles, and large-capacity magazines. The gun rights group, along with the retailer, challenged Pritzker, arguing the restrictions were a violation of the Second Amendment, which protects the right to keep and bear arms. Pritzker celebrated Wednesday's ruling, saying, quote, "The gun lobby has insisted on every legal maneuver to block this law, refusing to acknowledge that lives will be saved by this important piece of legislation. Despite these challenges, I remain confident that the assault weapons ban will be upheld and will create a safer Illinois for our residents." But while Wednesday's decision keeps the ban in place for now, the fate of the law remains uncertain. The conservative majority in 2008 struck down a Washington, D.C. law banning handguns on the grounds it violated the Second Amendment. The court has tilted further in that direction since. Gun control advocates were dismayed last June when the court struck down New York State gun limits and recognized the right to carry a handgun in public for self-defense. Reuters Supreme Court correspondent Andrew Chung.
That ruling could make it easier for lower courts to strike down new or existing gun control laws by requiring those courts to ensure that the laws that they're scrutinizing are consistent with the nation's historical tradition of gun regulation. In essence, requiring judges to find some sort of historical analog to the law that they're looking at. And that's what the challengers to the Illinois ban on firearms defined as assault weapons were arguing, that there is no such historical analog.
The Illinois assault weapons ban is one Democratic President Joe Biden has said he'd like to enact nationwide, but Republican opposition makes any such bill almost impossible. A federal assault weapon ban enacted in 1994 lapsed a decade later and has not been renewed by Congress despite Democratic efforts, amid a spate of U.S. mass shootings in recent years.
U.S. President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on Wednesday both underscored their determination to reach a deal soon to raise the federal government's $31.4 trillion debt ceiling and avoid an economically catastrophic default.
I'm confident that we'll get the agreement on the budget, that America will not default.
Biden addressed the looming crisis before leaving for the G7 Summit of World Leaders in Hiroshima, Japan, a trip cut short due to ongoing negotiations.
We're going to come together because there's no alternative but to do the right thing for the country. We have to move on. And to be clear, this negotiation is about the outlines of what the budget will look like, not about whether or not we're going to, in fact, pay our debts. The leaders have all agreed we will not default. Every leader has said that.
Biden's comments come after he and top congressional leaders on Tuesday met in the Oval Office, and the president agreed to negotiate directly with McCarthy on a deal after a months-long standoff. An agreement needs to be reached and passed by both chambers of Congress before the federal government runs out of money to pay its bills, which could happen as soon as June 1st. Asked by reporters at the Capitol Wednesday whether it's possible to reach a debt ceiling deal by the time Biden returns from Asia on Sunday, McCarthy replied, quote, "It's doable."
But now we're along such a short timeline, it makes it almost harder. But if there's one thing you know from me, I never give up. I have the grit, the perseverance, and we're going to get it done.
Negotiators are aiming to hammer out an agreement before Biden's scheduled return. Congress would then have to act swiftly before the deadline hits. McCarthy said the House, which Republicans currently control by a slim 9-seat majority, would vote first on any deal before sending it on to the Democrat-controlled Senate for approval. Senate rules would require at least 9 Republicans to go along with any deal.
Several people died and thousands were evacuated from their homes as torrential rain battered Italy's northern Emilia-Romagna region, triggering widespread floods, officials said on Wednesday. The Coast Guard rescued residents in Faenza from their roofs. Italy's civil protection minister said some areas have received half their annual rainfall in just 36 hours, causing rivers to burst their banks, sending water cascading through towns and submerging thousands of acres of farmland. The torrential rains followed months of drought, which dried out the land, reducing its capacity to absorb water and worsening the impact of the floods, meteorologists said. The vice president of Emilia-Romagna said the rains were starting to ease later on Wednesday, but the river levels were still rising. This weekend's Formula One race in Imola, which is close to many of the worst-hit areas, was called off after the government said the emergency services had to concentrate on the rescue operation. Muddy waters flowed through the streets in Faenza, forcing locals to flee to the top stories of their homes. Many were rescued by firefighters in dinghies. Road and rail links were blocked in numerous locations, and the mayors of many towns and cities, including Bologna, urged residents not to leave their homes. It was the second time this month that Emilia-Romagna has been battered by bad weather, with at least 2 people dying during storms at the beginning of May.
One final ship full of grain left port in Ukraine on Wednesday. That just one day before Russia could quit the pact that allows exports through the Black Sea. The United Nations and Turkey brokered the agreement back in July. It was meant to facilitate exports and head off a mounting global food crisis sparked by the conflict in Ukraine. But the deal is set to expire on Thursday, and Moscow has warned it could walk away. That's unless a list of demands about its own exports are met. This week, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said a lot of open questions remain. He said contact was being maintained, but decision time was near. The UN has also said talks continue, but described them as being at a delicate stage. While Russian exports of food and fertilizer are not subject to Western sanctions, Moscow says restrictions on payments, logistics and insurance amount to a ban. Washington rejects that claim, saying Russian exports are as high as they were before conflict began.